Welcome back to Indianomics. We have been discussing with three experts, Ashish Gupta of Credit Suisse, Diwakar Gupta, the former Managing Director of State Bank of India, and Deep Mukherjee, Senior Director at Fitch, about whether the NPL problem can be resolved in the normal course with economic growth at 7 or 8%, or whether some loans for some corporates have gone so bad that you have to attempt some kind of surgery, probably transferring those loans to a bad bank or selling off those loans to more healthy companies. Well, Deep, Mr. Gupta believes that punishing promoters will be unfair, that banks have to take a haircut, in which case the taxpayer is picking up the bill. Is there any other solution to this problem?
No, loans has to be written off. Having said that, you know, as several RBI governors and ministers have said, there are no sick promoters, only sick companies. So, you know, it's unthinkable that PSU banks, effectively financed by taxpayers' money, will take all the hit. Now, would a surgical, you know, measure be required? Because if we, you know, the overall group of companies would take 4 or 5 years to recover. If I just focus on the distressed companies, which may be formally taxed as distressed, or as Ashish has identified, with EBITDA coverage below 1, these companies would take, even at a robust economic growth rate, 5 to 10 years, which is to say the current NPA problem will haunt Indian banks' balance sheet for 5-10 years. So banks again are clearly not above the board, because in 2010-2011, when there was a revival in the Indian economy, under the assumption that India is decoupled, they have given loan at an assuming 8% growth year on year. So
we are again going to the blame. What I'm saying is, yes, the promoters may be to blame, the banks may be to blame. What is the solution?
So the current provisions allow for selling NPS. So first, you have to tag companies at NPS. Unless you recognize the NPA problem and keep on short of as they say, extend and pretend with various form of restructuring, you cannot sell it to asset reconstruction companies. So the first thing is you have to identify and tag them as NPS. Then you have to sell them to asset reconstruction companies. Now, given the size of the problem,
asset reconstruction companies don't have that much money.
That much of balance sheet. So what we possibly would require is something of a special mega asset reconstruction company, something that, you know, and it has to be thought for the first time. That like we have a sovereign wealth fund in other nations, we need to have a sovereign distressed asset fund for India, which will take over these companies, liquidate where they have to, infuse capital where they have to, and free up banks' balance sheet.
Can we isolate it to steel companies? For the simple reason that power is a different kettle of fish altogether. It is entangled in so many ways, with PPAs signed with several SEBs. You know, to sell off power companies to other power companies may be more difficult, or to auction them. Would you think that it is possible in steel?
I would not think so. In fact, I would concur with Mr. Diwakar Gupta here that it is wrong to put the blame on any one person, whether the government, whether the promoter, or even the banks, right? So, and as you also said, that all of us had different expectations, and this has come through. And what Deep also said, that you need a bad bank out there to take over these assets, but it will not be one shoe fits all. You will have to look at different solutions for different people. Steel companies will have a different solution. Maybe you can have auction of steel companies as a solution. Power may be a different solution, that you can have, say theoretically, NTPC taking over some of the problem companies. You have a bad bank, a separate bank for road companies, etc. So in my view, probably you need to make 4 or 5 bad banks which sectorally focus on companies and to take over the assets. And in fact, in my view, with the policymaker, the choices are to either you directly put capital in the banks, or you provide capital to these asset reconstruction companies or the bad bank to take over these assets from the bank balance sheets and free up their balance sheets to take
lend to the bust companies.
Yes.
Okay, what do you think is the easiest solution, Mr. Gupta? Do you agree that you have to compartmentalize sectorally?
I agree. I would actually, and you know, we are just doing blue sky thinking because we don't know what to do. I would do a model which would be a mix and match of what Ashish said and what Deep said. So let's take an example. Today the government says they'll give 14,000 crores of capital this year, 22,000 crores next year, something. Effectively, banks are writing off 1,000 crores. They are being recapitalized for 1,000 crores. If there is a mechanism by which this 1,000 crores can go to the industries to make them more, what should you say, economically viable, then in 1,000 crores you could save 5,000 crores of assets. I am not a particular votary of a bad bank because that takes the onus away from the banks to resolve their current portfolio.
Okay.
There has to be a very, very focused initiative to de-bottleneck and resolve what is currently existing as stressed, and it will have to have an element of write-off whichever way you do it.
So it has to be a write-off which will be partly borne by the banks, partly borne by the government, and partly borne by the promoter.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, nobody is saying you let the promoter go away. Okay. But don't brand a promoter as malified or dishonest in every case. There are things which go wrong beyond his control. And now,
who sits in judgment, Mr. Gupta? I mean, that this promoter did not gold plate while this promoter did gold plate.
Look, judgment is an essential part of any management. The fact that you give credit to a promoter is a matter of judgment. Nobody can come as a matter of entitlement to say, I have a unit, therefore you give me money. If you are not able to exercise judgment, you don't have a management. Then you are going by a template, and you can actually run this through a model, and you can continuously write off according to a percentage. Judgment will have to be an integral part. I have been saying this again and again. Public sector banks are suffering the consequences of not being allowed to exercise judgment through regulatory overreach. Okay. That needs to be addressed.
Okay, well, we have just the last 5 minutes for each of you. I mean, a minute each for each of you. Deep, your suggestion to bring down the NPLs to RBI's level of 4.8%.
I think within next 6 to 12 months, definitely we either need to recapitalize banks so that they can become normal, or remove.
40,000 is not enough.
It's not enough, or we have to remove the bad assets, lock, stock and barrel, out of it in a single entity owned by the government, maybe financed, however, owned by the government with authority to decide on who will be liquidated.
What should be the capital of that? How much? What is the government's bill?
No, that can be in the structure of a fund. It would have exceptional legal power. Okay. That will be a structure of a fund. And, it is not supposed to sort of buy from the banks as the way ARCs does. They will be issuing notes.
Okay.
Okay,
Ashish, how much of capital do you think banks will need, or what is the other way to
So, in fact, our entire assessment is that state-owned banks need over the next 4 years almost $40 billion of capital.
Okay.
Right, and that is
2.5 lakh crore.
And that is part of it is for cleaning up the balance sheet. Part of it is for making the balance sheet strong again, because many of these banks have 7% tier 1. They should at least be at 9.5%. And of course, they need capital to give more loans. The other thing, I think the starting point of any solution has to be recognizing the problem. And first, through the regulator, recognition of the problem has to happen, because as long as the problem is not recognized, as Mr. Divakar Gupta says, that the debt of these companies is getting larger and larger, right? So for steel companies, these steel companies 2 years ago did not have $3,000 of debt on their book per ton of steel. Right, it has increased, and the more we delay the recognition, the larger the haircut that will be needed.
Okay, Mr. Gupta, last word.
No, I think I really am all for execution. You need to set up an empowered committee which will segment the currently stressed units into those which have malifieds, those which are beyond any fault on their part, those where the managements are competent, and those where the managements are not competent. Thereafter, whatever this empowered committee says must be a binding decision on all lenders. It could mean a haircut, it could mean a change of management, it could mean conversion of debt into equity, maybe with recourse to the promoters to get it back when the units are healthy. But this needs to be done quickly. As I said, recapitalizing banks is no solution. Today you don't have a problem of hidden NPAs coming out. It's fresh NPAs which are getting created quarter on quarter.
Point taken. Well, we are out of time, but actually not out of solutions. The key takeaways: one, the NPA problem is not going away in a hurry. In the second half, you're not going to see the total NPA problem decreasing. If you count it as NPLs, restructured assets, and those that have been given the 525 SOP or incentive, the total amount of bad loans is only going to increase for the next couple of years. Also, you will need robust growth for the next 5 or 6 years for these companies to perhaps come back on rail. Even then, we will have a large segment of NPAs. So, normal course of resolution of NPAs is not possible. Two, the capital needed is not to the extent of $6 billion or $9 billion, but $40 billion or 2.5 lakh crore. And third, we perhaps need, we definitely need an extraordinary solution in the form of probably appointing a committee, taking away bad loans in some sectors, apportioning the burden between promoters and banks. The solution finally has to come very quickly. We are sitting on a time bomb. That's it from this edition of Internomics.